Let's see if this is working. Hi, everybody. It looks like it is working. Sweet. I'm going to give it 1 second here because I'm just setting up. I want to make sure I get this right. There we go. That way I can get this running. Sorry. Almost there. I know. I'm live. I'm by myself today, so it means that I've got to get it set up and running and then share it and check for comments and stuff. So it's just going to take me 1 second here, and then we'll get started. Almost ready to go. I just want to share this onto the event page so that if people are looking there, they can find it. So it's just going to take me 1 second, then we'll get started. Oh, taking me longer than I like. There we go. We are live. Posted. Okay, guys. Here we go. How is everybody today? I hope you are well. I'm doing okay. It's morning, so that's something. Today we're going to do a little torn paper discovery art. Now, the cool thing about torn paper is it is basically anything you want it to be. And that's kind of the amazing thing. But it also lets you do things that you don't expect because there's this unplanned part of it, right? You're tearing paper and it's very random when you do it. So we're going to start that today. All you need is a couple pieces of paper, a pencil, and something to color with, markers, colored pencils, crayons, whatever you like. I'm actually going to use this piece of construction paper today. You don't have to use construction paper. I'm using it so you can see the color, so you can see it on top of the white paper a little bit better. You can just use regular white paper and tear that as well. That's up to you. This just makes it easier for the camera to see. So that's why I'm using that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set my white paper to the side, and I'm just going to start tearing this up. And I'm not really thinking too much about how I'm tearing it. You can tear it more to your liking if you want. Ooh, that's kind of a fun one. It's really up to you how you tear it. Bigger pieces, smaller pieces, totally your call, right? And you can have a mix of them. They can be really weird shaped tears, or they can be fairly normal tears. But the idea is to create something that you don't know what you're getting, right? So I'm just going to finish tearing this up. You may not use all of these pieces of paper, by the way. In fact, you probably won't use all of them, and that's okay. So today's art is, unless you find stuff within it, we'll talk about that in a little bit, what's generally called non-representational art, which means that it doesn't actually look like anything. It's not meant to look like something. It's just shapes and colors, right? It's not a picture of a dog or a face or, a skyline or anything like that. It's just what it is. And there was actually, that was kind of an odd thing in art for a long time, if you guys don't know this. But there was a movement, an artist movement, if you will, and I'm just kind of randomly throwing these onto my page. If they overlap, that's okay. You can also lay these out the way you, like, if you want to be, like, I want this one to go here like this. Totally cool as well. I'm just kind of randomly throwing them on there. And like I said, if they overlap, that's okay. Big pieces, small pieces. I kind of like this piece. We'll see what I get. Now, this movement in art was actually called the Abstract Expressionist Movement, which is a big mouthful of words. I know, so don't worry if you don't remember it. If you want to remember anything from it, you can remember the name Jackson Pollock. He was a big guy in that movement, and he was that guy that instead of like making pictures, he would actually just fling paint from his brush onto the canvas, right? So if you're always like, I want to splatter paint, you're basically doing what Jackson Pollock invented. I'm thinking maybe a couple people did it before him, but he was the one that really made it big. So that is something you can do with art. You don't have to. Your art does not have to be something. It can just be it, which is really cool to think about. Now, like I said, I randomly put these down on the paper myself, like this. But you can lay them out meticulously, or really just take your time if you want to. Another thing you can do, and I didn't do it here, is if you have a glue stick, you can use just a tiny bit, just a dab of the glue stick to hold the pieces of paper down when you're tracing. This makes it a little bit easier, but if you use too much glue, it's going to stick and then it might rip your paper, which you don't want to do. So if you're going to use the glue stick, it's really just a tiny, tiny, tiny bit. If you have questions, I do have the feed in front of me, so feel free to ask questions if you want. But I'm going to go ahead and start. What I did is I've laid out my scraps, and now I'm going to take my pencil, and I'm going to trace the outlines of the scraps onto my white paper. Now, here's the deal. If you're using something like marker, you want to be very light with your pencil because the pencil will show through on the marker. Now, there's a couple other things I want to do, and I'm going to show you those later, but I'm just going to show you a basic one right now. So I'm going to kind of just trace, and it's okay if the paper moves because it's all random anyway. And this is going to take me a couple minutes here. Right? I'm just going to trace out these shapes, and if they're overlapping, I might just follow that overlap and see what happens. And guess what? It's paper that's been torn. It's imperfect. So your tracing does not have to be perfect. My lines are going to be a little bit thicker because I want you to be able to see them. They're going to be a little bit heavier, a little bit darker than what you want to do with your lines. Just keep that in mind. I am really sloppy with my tracing today, which is okay. Mornings, They do that to you. Here we go. Around. And then once I get done, I like to take the pieces of paper that I've already traced off, so I know I've already done those ones. And also you can kind of see what you get as you go. So I'm using my other hand to hold the paper down. Like I said, if you use that little bit, tiny bit of glue, you don't have to hold the paper down as much. And you can see, maybe, it's a little bit hard to see at that angle. I'll hold it up once I'm done with all of them, but you can see that my tracing did not get all the way down, and that's okay because we're kind of getting general shapes, right? So if it's not a perfect trace, no big deal. So I'm going to kind of do this. That one was easy. Ooh, this one's get like a point to it, which I like. I'm just kind of tracing it. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. I'm going a little fast so I can show you everything and show you a couple other little things you can do to change it up if you want. But this is the idea, is you're just kind of tracing around these pieces of paper. That's what they're there for. Oops, I moved my paper. That's okay. I'm going to kind of adjust that stuff. We'll see what I get. A little bit of organic magic there, where things don't always work out exactly as you planned, and that's okay. That's kind of the whole point of this project is, you can't really plan it out ahead too much because you don't know what you're going to get. So that's kind of the fun part, is that magic of not knowing. Oh boy, this is going to be interesting. So tracing here, this big section here. That guy's done, so I can do that. Oh, that's a hard one to trace. There we go. I'm going to trace the inside here. And come back across. And you can see I'm moving, like I said, I'm moving kind of fast, which is okay. Because that can actually add to it a little bit too. And I'm just taking these pieces of paper away as I'm done with them, so that it's easier for me to work on the page. Okay, so I've got this kind of a thing going on. Okay, so you can see that. You can see my lines aren't all finished, clean, closed, perfect. None of those things, right? Totally okay. Now, there's a couple things you can do at this point. One thing you can do is you can try to finish up your lines a little bit with your pencil if you want to kind of guess which is something I like to do. Remember, this doesn't have to be perfect. These were torn pieces of paper, so it's not like there's something special about it. It's just paper that you tore, and so if you don't get it exactly right, that's okay. In fact, it kind of adds to the charm of it. So I'm just kind of cleaning up, closing up my lines. Now, once you have these shapes on the paper, and you can see I kind of went overlap there, this paper moved on me. You can do a couple of different things. You can just be like, you know what, these are the shapes, I like them, and go with those. You can look at the shapes and change them a little bit if you want. If you're like, I like this, but I want it to be a little bit more like this or that. Or, and this is another thing you can do, is if you start to see things within there, right? If you start to see things within those shapes, you can go, oh, you know what? That kind of looks like this. Maybe I'll change it to make it look like that. So, you know, like if I were looking at these and I saw like someone sitting in a chair, like here's their knees and their arms, their knees, their arms, and their heads bent down like they're going to be reading something. Like I can kind of see that in there, right? If I wanted to draw that out from this point, I could. That's part of the discovery of it. But I'm going to keep this simple today for me because I'm a simple person. And I'm just going to color the shapes. Now, like I said, you can use colored pencils or markers. I like markers. I'm going to use these two markers here because I like weird colors. And you can decide, am I going to color them all this, 2 colors? Do I want to do 3 colors? Do I want to make multiple colors within shapes? Totally up to you. And like I said, normally with this heavy of a pencil, the pencil will show right through the marker. So you want to use like an eraser maybe and lighten up your pencil if it's this dark. If it's not, that's okay. I'm also going to cheat a little bit and use some black at the end to help cover up the pencil lines. So there's that as well. So I'm going to kind of just color this and fill it in. And I'm doing my main shapes, the shapes that were the paper, green. And then the rest of the paper is going to be this purple. And we're going to see how that turns out. And I'm going to color kind of quickly. You don't have to color quickly. You can take your time. If you want to color slowly, that's fine. I just want to make sure I get it all in while we're together so I can show you a final product. When I use the markers, I'm one of those people that likes to go around the edge first. So I have kind of a thicker line around the edge. It actually helps me keep the marker within the shape because I'm kind of fast and crazy with the way I move the marker. And so having that line there helps protect me from messing up too bad. But if you mess up, no problem, right? Mess ups are totally acceptable, especially with weird random shapes. So I'm just kind of do that. Like I said, you can use crayons, markers, colored pencils, whatever you like with this. Obviously, markers are a little bit faster, which is part of the reason I chose them for today. If I were to choose one to do, if I weren't in a hurry, I'd probably go colored pencil because you can get a little bit more of a smooth finish on it. But markers can be cool. And like I said, they go fast, right? As long as they don't dry out on you. That's the one thing. You never know when a marker is going to dry out. You know when a colored pencil is going to run out, right? Because it just gets tiny, right? A marker doesn't shrink as you use it, so you don't know how long it's going to last on you. But that's okay. That's part of the discovery. So I'm getting along here, chugging away, making this weird shape here. And yeah, some of your shapes can go off the edge of the paper like mine did if you want. Or they can all fit on the paper perfectly and neatly. That's also an option. Totally up to you. I mentioned earlier the abstract expressionist movement, and I mentioned Jackson Pollock. If you really like art like that, there are a bunch of guys that were in that movement, so you can check that out. I'll put a link up on the Facebook page, or on the video after I'm done, because I'm by myself today. I don't have somebody to put that up for me, or I would. But it was really cool, and it wasn't that long ago. And they did some really cool stuff. Really cool. Now sometimes, even though a marker is still new and full, if you leave it uncovered or you use it for a while, it starts to kind of like temporarily dry out. So keep an eye on that when you're doing this if you're using marker, because mine got close there for a second, but now it seems to be working okay. But if that does happen, you can always take a break with that color and switch to the other color and come back to that color, that first color, in a few minutes. Also, try to keep your points of your markers in good shape. You shouldn't be like bashing down on the marker or pushing way too hard on the tip, because it changes the shape of the tip and it makes it harder to use the marker. You know, I've seen it where the marker tip is like pushed down into the marker body itself, and it just is like, what happened? So keep an eye on that. Also, change the side of the marker you're using every once in a while, because the tip will actually start to bend just a little bit in one direction or another if you don't. And you don't want that, because then you get weird like double lines and stuff with your markers. That happens a lot more with the thinner markers than the big fat ones, but it can happen with the fat ones too, so be careful about that stuff, you know? It's always good to keep track and take care of your art supplies. And of course, I'm a huge hypocrite for saying that, because I'm terrible with my art supplies. But I know from experience, so that's why I'm telling you. So I'm getting these done. Now, like I said, if you saw shapes that you wanted to draw out, you could have drawn them out. I'm actually really enjoying just kind of this idea of, it's not anything, but it's something, right? And that's a really cool thing, like if you have like a lot on your mind. Like you're like, I can't stop thinking about the fact that maybe I'm going back to school in the fall, maybe I'm not, I don't know. I got a lot going on. Whatever. If your mind's like gets like really racy, like things like just keep happening in your head like quickly, you know, thoughts going wild, which happens. It happens to me. Doing this kind of art where you're not really thinking too much about it is actually really helpful for a lot of people, because it allows you not to think, right? You're just kind of there, being in the moment. Doing this kind of thing, or carving, like if you're into printmaking and you carve linoleum blocks, that process of carving, because you've already drawn your design, you're just kind of taking it in, you know, you're kind of just going through the process. Those kind of moments can be really nice, because you're just not thinking. Sometimes it's nice to not think. I try to live my life that way, without thinking. So yeah, I'm almost there with the green, and then I'll put the purple on underneath. And if you're using a surface other than like an old folding table like this, you should probably, if you're using markers, have a piece of paper underneath of this to kind of help for any marker bleed through, because I doubt your parent is going to want a bunch of marker lines on their dining room table. So keep that in mind, right? Always make sure to minimize the permanent mess. I mean, if there's a little bit of a temporary mess, that's one thing. But if it's something that's going to, you know, be permanent, it's not quite as cool. So I'm going to try coloring this fairly quickly, because we've been talking about this for a while. Like I said, if you have any questions, feel free to jump on and ask me a question and I'll answer it. I like green and purple together. And there's, I don't know, I'm weird. But also, when you get to the point where you study art in college, they teach you a lot of color theory, where they actually teach you what colors go together and what colors don't, and how come colors are like they are, and what they make you feel, and all of these things that it's like, it seems like, wow, this is way too much information, but it's actually really cool to learn about. And one thing they teach you, and this is kind of a strange thing, especially if you go for graphic design, which is what I did, they teach you about the color wheel, which we've all learned about, or a lot of people learn about the color wheel in school, in elementary school even. And we think about the primary colors of red, yellow, blue. And then you go to college and they go, what if that's not completely true? And you're like, what? And so I actually like to work off of a different color wheel. And I'm not going to get into too much detail with that color wheel because it is a lot. And really, at least for now, red, yellow, blue is your primary colors in the color wheel. Totally fine. Totally works. Not something to worry about. But if you're like, I like red and purple better, or green and purple better than green and red, that's cool because you know what? You're not too far off. And it's not like they go together better than green and red to me, but it's something in between, really, between red and purple that goes the best with green. It's a color called magenta, which some people know. It's kind of almost like a bright pink, but not. And so it's kind of between red and purple. Magenta is. And so that's actually the perfect color to go with green. But I digress. Almost done with my green here. Ooh, it's starting to dry. Saw that coming. There we go. Almost there. And you can do a much nicer job of coloring this in if you want. Like I said, you can take your time. You can let your markers recover a little bit. I'm just trying to get it finished so I can show you guys. So here's just the green part. And you can see it's kind of cool like that, right? We have this big piece kind of over here and a bigger piece here, the one that kind of looked like somebody like reading or something, right? And then some little chunks. This one kind of looks like Australia. This one kind of looks like Iowa. I don't know. Australia and Iowa are not even close to the same size, but in reality, but they kind of look like that. So that's interesting. Discovery, amazing. I also like maps, so seeing the shapes of places is interesting. So I'm not even gonna color all of it. I don't think. I want to give you some other examples. So I'm gonna color it in a little bit here on the side, and then we're gonna move on, just because I want to show you the two colors together, and you can see that they kind of work together, green and purple, more than people realize. So I'm just coloring this in. And maybe I'll give you on there, when I put up the link for Abstract Expressionism, I'll also put up a link for different color wheels, so you can see that there are different ones. So much like a lot of things in life, there's no one real answer. There are lots of answers. So I'm just kind of filling this in. So I'm going to kind of pause right here on this piece real quick. So you can see the green and purple together. They kind of work. And you know what's the cool thing is, and I'll come back and finish this at the end, but you can, after you're done, you can even go, which way is up on this? Maybe it's this way. I kind of like it that way, actually. Maybe this is up on this piece, which is cool, which is really cool. Now, one thing I wanted to show you is I traced this with the pencil, and that's fine. One other thing you can do, if you want to be really weird, is instead of tracing with a pencil, you can do it kind of like a sketchy kind of thing, right? So you put your piece of paper down, and then you take a marker or a colored pencil or a crayon. That is annoying me, so there we go. And you just kind of do this, right? And so you're creating these lines that are coming off of here, and they're kind of feathery, and you work your way around, and if you get to here, it's easier to move your paper than it is to move your hand. And this moves, that's okay, you can line it back up because you can see the lines, and just work your way around your shape. I'm going to move my paper one more time. and you have something like that. So that's a little bit different. And then you can switch colors out. Maybe add a different color on here. They can overlap. They might not overlap. Whatever you think. But it's that same idea. You're just taking it in a different direction, right? You're still kind of tracing this paper onto this other paper, but instead of it using a clean line, you're creating this kind of fuzzy edge thing, which is cool. So that's another way to trace. Now, remember, like I said earlier, be careful with your markers. Don't put too much pressure on it. You can hear me hitting the marker on the table, but I'm not slamming it in there, not jabbing it in there. I'm just kind of lightly pushing it. It's more the motion that makes the sound than the pressure. So you can do stuff like that, which is pretty cool too. Actually, I kind of like that. So that's another way you can do that. So keep that in mind. Oh, it looks like somebody added links to the color wheel and the abstract expressionism. Thank you for that. So you can look those up as well. But yeah, I'm going to work on finishing this real quick. One other thing I can do, actually, because coloring it in is going to take forever, and honestly, you don't need to see me coloring it in, is you can trace the edges of the pieces, right? So if you're like, I like the green and purple, but I want a nice line, you can use a black marker. I'm using a Sharpie, which is permanent, which your parents might be like, no permanent markers. Totally makes sense. Easier to clean up if you have a regular marker. I just like the point on the Sharpie, which is why I use it. But you can use just a regular black marker, and you can trace around the edges, right? And this gives you a cleaner line between the two, right? And you can make that as thick or as thin as you want. If you want it to be like a really thick line, just keep going over it until it's nice and thick. Which I kind of like the thicker line on that. Right? So you can see the difference between like there and here, how that looks. So that's also another stylistic choice. But it's all up to you. That's kind of the cool thing about this. I'm going to keep tracing this. If you have questions, feel free to ask them. Like I said, those are just two ways to trace the shapes. You can find all kinds of different ways to trace shapes. And there's no wrong answer. You could even take the shape, trace it, and then glue the shape like near it, but not on exactly the tracing, so you can almost make a 3D effect with the paper if you wanted to, which is kind of a fun idea. I might try that sometime. But I'm just coloring in my purple now. And you can see the purple's darker than the green, and the purple kind of fades into the black a little bit, which is kind of cool. Because then you get like a really clean line along the green side, but the purple, it kind of like blends in a little bit, which is kind of creepy and cool. If you like, creepy cool stuff, which I do. I like creepy cool. Who doesn't? Actually, there are people that don't, and that's fine. So yeah, I'm just coloring this in. And you can see it's getting solid. And if you're like, you know what? Maybe I want to leave the middle white and this purple and maybe these ends purple. You can do that. In fact, I'm probably going to do that because then it creates what's called contrast. Contrast means that things can get to stand out, right? When something has contrast, something pops out of it, right? Something stands out. If it doesn't have contrast, it all kind of blends together. I'm a big fan of contrast. So if you want to work with contrast, keeping part of the page white, good way to do that. Using colors or shades that are far apart, so things that are either really light or really dark together, or very different colors, working with those together, that creates contrast. And so that's kind of the cool thing. Green and purple themselves create contrast because they're on opposite ends of the spectrum. So that's part of the reason I like green and purple as well, because it creates contrast. So yeah, I think that's probably just enough purple, I think, because then we have this cool white area in the middle. It almost looks like islands. Yeah, it does kind of look like islands. And I'm going to finish tracing these with the Sharpie. because I can, and I like the look of it. So I'm just going to kind of trace around. And I'm moving faster than I probably would if I weren't on camera, just because I want to make sure you guys get all of it. So I've got this. I want to thicken that line a little bit because I already made the other one really thick, right? So it would be weird to have thin lines on this one. I didn't do the other side of this yet. I'm really good today. Woo-wee! One thing is when you make your lines thick, some of the pointer parts, like right there, are going to kind of blend together and mush together a little bit. But that's okay. Because depending on how you do it, you can still get a nice point to it while still having these big, fat, thick lines. Just going to finish up, and then we'll talk a little bit if you want. Like I said, if you have any questions about this, or you want to show your work, if you're like, hey, I took a picture, I already finished, because, you know, you're slow and I'm fast, that's cool. Put it on the comments. I'd love to see what you did. It gets boring just seeing your own artwork. I love seeing everybody else's stuff too. So feel free to throw that up on there. Share it. Be bold. Share your work. Let other people see. Ooh, my paper got a little wet there. That is one problem with using markers. Also, it's a little warm in here. Is that it can get the paper kind of wet and terry. And when I say terry, I don't mean like the name Terry. I mean terry like it likes to rip a little bit. Or like get fuzzy. You know what I mean. Everybody's had that moment where they put so much marker down that it gets like, kind of like, oh no, I'm going to tear through the paper. So if you're using marker, that's something to be aware of. You might just need to let your paper dry out a little bit in that spot before you go back over it. Just something to keep in mind. But yeah. The really cool thing about this is you can use things like your favorite colors together. Like, even if your favorite colors aren't normally seen in the real world, that doesn't mean they can't be used on something like this, because it's not anything, right? So it's totally cool that you can put those colors together like that. Also, even if you find something and draw it based off of this, if it's a different color than it is in the real world, that's totally okay too. I love that kind of stuff, you know? It's kind of tracing kind of fast now. And I'm leaving my lines a little bit thinner because I just want to finish up so I can show it to you. Remember, you can take your time. I don't get to take as much time as you guys today. Oop, just left a little spot there. That's okay. Just kind of wrapping this up here. And the cool thing is, if you have these paper scraps, you can use them again and again and again. And if you don't want to throw them away, you could always make a collage out of them afterwards as well. So they can be reused multiple times. And each time you're still going to get a different piece of art, because you never know how they're going to lay down on the paper or how they're going to overlap. And then, like, if you actually use the pieces for something, then they find a permanent home after that as well. And so you don't actually have to throw anything away. You can just keep using them until they're done. And yeah, so there we go. Like I said, if I had more time, I'd probably thicken these lines up a little bit. But that's kind of cool. It's almost got like a camouflage feel, except for with the purple, instead of like a different green. But it's got that blotchy camouflage feel, and it's also going to depend a lot on how you tear your paper, right? My paper is kind of these squarish chunks. But if you're like really creative with how you're cutting your paper or tearing your paper, that can change. Also, you can always use scissors and cut the paper. Just be careful with scissors, because you want to cut the paper and just the paper. With this style, you can add, as many of these as you want. And the cool thing is with this, if you're using marker, the way the marker overlaps, it creates different colors within it. So you've got kind of a purple over this blue-pink area here, which is really neat. So those are kind of a couple of examples of working with just paper scraps. And if you're like, you know, I want to work with something other than paper scraps, you can do this with anything. Anything that has a shape, right? Anything you can set onto your paper and trace with, you can use, right? If you're like, you know, some wood chips that you found outside, you know, you can use that. I mean, wood chips are all kind of the same shape, but you get a little bit differences, but you get my idea. Anything that has shape, you can do. You can trace and put it on there like that. So that's kind of a cool thing. You can just find things that are different shapes, and they don't all have to be the same thing. Like if you find like a watch and a pencil and a wood chip, because I've got wood chips on my brain, they can all be part of the things you trace onto the paper, and that's kind of a cool thing too. So yeah, that was our project today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them into the comments. We'll keep checking the comments even after the video is no longer live. So keep that in mind, because the video will be up here for a while. So if you started in the middle and you're like, what did he do? Well, you can go back and start from the beginning, which is nice, or you can probably figure it out because it's not too complicated. It's very simple today, super easy project, and it can create some really cool refrigerator magnet worthy art. So thank you, and have a great rest of your day.